The Bible is hard to read, and that's coming from a pastor. You see, the Bible is an ancient book. Well, actually, maybe not so much even a book as it is a library of 66 ancient pieces of literature written over a span of 1,500 years by 40 authors telling one unified story. And because it's an ancient book, it's really important to remember that the Bible is not written to you specifically, but the Bible is written for you. See, as Westerners, we can sometimes have an egocentric view of life, thinking it's all about us, including the Bible. But the authors of the Bible were not thinking of you. They weren't thinking of me when they wrote those documents. Their words weren't written for a 21st century culture. They were written to an ancient culture, drastically different than ours. So if the Bible isn't written to me, then who is it written to? Well, the Bible isn't really written to any single person or even any single group of people. Rather, it's a collection of books written by different authors to different cultures at different times. Theologian Scott McKnight encourages us to remember this idea when reading this ancient book, that was then, this is now. That God spoke in the Old Testament in Old Testament ways, and he spoke in the New Testament in New Testament ways, and that God speaks in our days and our ways. The key to reading the Bible is to remember that context matters. This means that if you read a portion of Scripture, a Bible verse or a passage, which is called a text, please remember to read the pretext and the post-text so you can put that text into context. You see what I did there? You need to know who said what was said and who's the audience. We take a lot of scriptures out of context because we like the way they sound or they ring outside of the pretext and post-text. Let's use an example that's often used in Christian circles, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. This is the verse that we love to airlift out of context and apply it to our own lives, and it is encouraging. But let's apply some of what we learned. Who is it written to? It's written to the Jews when they're in exile in Babylon. And the Hebrew word for you is plural. It's not talking to an individual. And the pretext and post-text lets us know that Jeremiah is actually responding to a false prophet, Hananiah. He's prophesied that the Jews would have, in 2 years, would experience great prosperity. And Jeremiah comes along and says, no, more like 70 years until they experience that prosperity and freedom that Hananiah was prophesying about. So, ask yourself, whose prophecy do you prefer more, Hananiah's or Jeremiah's? For me, I prefer Hananiah's. But this is not about us. This text has nothing to do with us. Although it reveals the heart and character of God towards his people, and again, that's a larger story that we get to fit in on, that unifying story that connects all the documents in the Bible. It's almost like a wiki story, lots of contributors, but one story. And all of the commands and all of the documents feed into that one story. It's a story of God's great love, his creation, evil's distorting power, Jesus' ultimate victory, and God's plan to recreate his creation from heaven and earth. And there's a tone found in this one unifying story. And that tone helps us with perspective. What's the tone of the Bible? Love. What type of love? The Jesus type. A lot of the apparent contradictions sometimes in Scripture have to do with how we read the Bible. This library of documents has been transformative in my life. It's been worth wrestling with the cultural gaps and the contextual work to find my life rooted in truth that never goes out of style.